Hi, I'm Max Anderson. I'm the Director of Instructional Design and Learning Innovation for the University of Illinois College of Medicine, and I work closely with our faculty, staff, and students at all our campuses, though my work with the Urbana campus faculty and students is coming to an end once the last group of students in the Urbana Legacy curriculum graduate. I am also a recent graduate of the doctoral program in Instructional Technology from Northern Illinois University. What I'm sharing with you today is a bit about my doctoral research and the connection to our school. For my dissertation, I did a US-based study on behavioral intention to use and actual usage behavior of educational technology among medical education faculty who teach or facilitate in inquiry-based learning activities. That is a mouthful, and it is perhaps also the longest title for a dissertation in history. My chair joked in my defense, "Who let you use such a long title?" I replied, "You did." My interest in this topic stems from my now 7 years at the College of Medicine and how we use, or don't use, certain educational instructional technologies for various curricular purposes. I am also a medical librarian by training, though my library career was almost always geared to working with instructional technology. I developed and delivered many workshops and conference presentations to hopefully help other medical librarians and affiliated healthcare workers to better understand how to incorporate technology into their flow, and adamant that if the technology is a hindrance to their ability to facilitate their content delivery, to simply not use it. I will mainly use the term educational technology in this presentation, but know that instructional technology and educational technology are essentially the same thing. Here's a brief look at my own history with technology from about 20 years ago. My interest in educational technology goes back fairly far, I guess you could say. After I graduated from the Florida State University Library and Information Studies program in 1999, I worked for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in Seattle for a few years to help install granted computers in public and tribal libraries and then train the library staff how to use the technology and then how they could then teach others how to use it. In other words, a train the trainer program. This was my first real look at the power and impact of educational technology on so many levels. This photo shows me setting up a mobile lab to train a large group of librarians how to use the granted computers. For tech people, disregard the snake nest of cables in the middle. Flash forward to more recent days and how we have incorporated educational technologies in case-based discussions in our medical school. Educational technology has afforded us many opportunities to increase our impact on the learning of our students. Here is our DME friend, Dr. Abbas Haidari, leading a team-based learning session in our active learning spaces that were created just 5 to 6 years ago. Prior to the construction of these spaces, team-based learning, or TBL as it is commonly known, activities were done in the ear and eye infirmary and their auditorium. Auditory in general are not really suitable for any kind of team-based discussions, partly because students have to turn around and try to create a cocoon of sorts for their team to discuss the posed problem, while at the same time trying to not be disturbed by other students who are in their groups trying to do essentially the same thing. Here is Dr. Tushar Patel using Poll Everywhere, which is a type of educational technology that can help in case-based discussions by affording students the opportunity to respond anonymously to posed questions and for faculty to see results in real time. Finally, here is Dr. Maury Pescatelli using third-party software to display anatomical images to students. Note that this session was in an auditorium and was not a case-based discussion due to the constraints I just mentioned. So now, as you look at these images, you might notice some ubiquitous technology such as PowerPoint, computers, projectors, mice, keyboards, etc. These are universally recognized by most people in education. Because these types of technologies have been used for decades now, most people are pretty comfortable using them. However, look again at the image here. It may be hard to see, but there are table microphones for each table or group to respond orally to questions, monitors that go around the entire room and that are assigned to each table, and corner monitors that show what is happening on the other floor. Because we have so many students at our Chicago campus, we cannot fit them all into one room. Therefore, the remaining students are on another floor connected via technology such as closed-circuit televisions. There's also an electronic document camera and a fairly complicated control center for the technology in the rooms on the lectern. What increases cognitive demand on the part of instructors is how they communicate with students and other faculty in the same room, as well as those in the other active learning space on the opposite floor. There's a higher demand placed on the cognition of the instructor as well as the students. Fortunately, in Chicago, we have classroom IT staff who can help adjust audio levels of the microphones for faculty as well as for the table microphones for students, among other related technological complications. As we develop curricular content, we have to think through our processes as to how we plan for our content to be shared with students at each table and how to communicate with peers on the other floor so teaching can be done in a true partnership despite being on different floors. So, as I was working on my doctorate and trying to figure out what the heck I would do for a study, I didn't really have to go too far on a limb to find a rich content area. I keep up with the scholarly literature in my area, and I became increasingly interested in how different medical schools in the US approached the introduction and implementation of educational technology to aid in case-based activities. My study was completed just prior to the COVID pandemic in 2020, and the results reflect it, as you will see. And of course, the pandemic really upended how we here at UICOM deliver case-based instruction. I use the term inquiry-based learning, or IBL, as an umbrella term to describe three specific types of case-based instruction that are pretty well known. The first one being CBL, or case-based learning, problem-based learning, or PBL, and team-based learning, or TBL. In general, IBL is a type of active learning where students receive sequenced and scaffolded information about a task or an ill-structured problem to solve. An ill-structured problem is defined as one where there is no easily identifiable solution, and students traditionally work in groups to collaborate and come up with potential solutions. While none of these three modalities require the use of educational technology to be successfully implemented, there are situations where it could augment or improve content delivery. Some additional characteristics of IBL to set the stage include deep engagement with materials and opportunities to work with teams and faculty facilitators to discover solutions to problems of a clinical, scientific, ethical, and more nature. Scaffolding of information with a gradual reduction in facilitator direction. Situated cognition, in which instruction is based on specific realistic situations, which suits our content area of medical education quite well. And there is usually preparatory work for students to complete prior to the scheduled session to hopefully enable a more robust and informed discussion between students and faculty and within their teams. In addition to the ubiquitous software and hardware I previously mentioned, there are also other educational software tools that can be used to automate many of the steps in the delivery of certain IBL activities, affording the faculty facilitators the opportunity to focus more of their attention on content delivery. There can certainly be a lack of pedagogical purpose in the use of technology in IBL activities, or any educational activities for that matter, and challenges for students and faculty to get it to be functional at all, which can potentially disrupt teaching and learning experiences for all stakeholders. What we know based on previous studies is that there can be resistance from faculty to try different delivery methods. Sometimes there is an internal resistance because they are comfortable delivering their curricular content in the same way they have done for years and don't really want to change it, as they feel it adds more effort on their already demanding workload. The existing research on internal and external barriers and buy-in for faculty regarding educational technology suggests that there may be a perception that the introduction of these tools can disrupt their academic freedoms and familiar teaching activities. There may be specific technologies, though, that can enhance the delivery of content for both students and instructors and should not necessarily be ignored. I would be remiss, though, to not acknowledge that there are valid concerns such as the availability of support mechanisms, proper training on the use of technology, faculty development to help prepare them for implementation, and how faculty might be influenced by their peers to use or not use certain technologies. Some of these philosophical concepts helped drive my study. We also know that technology use can reduce paper waste. For example, Traditional delivery of TBLs include the use of paper scantrons, pencils, and paper packets or folders with case-based information. There are a growing number of technology solutions that are appearing on the market to convert traditional delivery of IBL or TBL, etc., to an online format. In our own college, for example, we used to use a lot of paper for TBL activities. Most of the paper was recycled, which resulted in a lot of waste. Once we implemented Benware to offer computer-based TBLs, there were other issues to occupy us, such as orienting students, faculty, IT staff, and coordinators to understand how the system works. And you can be sure that initially there was a steep learning curve for most of us. A key here is the importance of buy-in from administration, faculty, students, and all other stakeholders. In our experience transitioning to online TBL, all stakeholders were given a voice to share their ideas and concerns. I consider this the right way to introduce a new technology. There is surprisingly a lack of empirical studies on faculty perspectives of using educational technology specifically in IBL activities. There are exponentially many more studies that focus on the student perspectives. My hope is that the data collected for this study can be used to identify influencing characteristics and determine ways to support faculty more effectively, not just in our medical school, but all medical schools. I wanted to know, what are the beliefs and attitudes among faculty about the integration of technology in IBL activities? What are their intentions to adopt and integrate technology or not? Can we use this information to provide more appropriate interventions like improved faculty development opportunities or enhanced IT support? Here's my study purpose. Take a moment to read it, and I won't read it aloud to you since I know you can all read. The text that's in bold is important to remember as we go along. For a little background, this chart from the AAMC shows the number of medical schools and the instructional formats used for the academic year 2017-2018. Most of you know that this data is collected every year, and this particular academic year was the most recent data I could access for my study. In addition, not shown here, but details are available in my dissertation if you choose to read it. Many medical schools across the country have been going through significant curricular changes or are about to, which is potentially the perfect time to introduce alternative delivery mechanisms. As we go along, I will explain what is meant by behavioral intention and actual use behavior in this study. The chart on the left expands on the implementation stages for curricular change in medical schools. UICOM is probably now safely in the blue or lower left area at 19.1% at this point in our curricular change. The chart on the right shows the number of medical schools that increased their use of team-based learning specifically in academic year 2017-2018. Not shown on the chart, CBL is actually the most popular type of IBL used in medical schools in the United States. For this particular academic year of 2017-2018, the AAMC reported that CBL was used at 133 schools, PBL at 65 schools, and TBL at 73 schools. It should be noted that many schools use more than one IBL delivery type, so there is going to be some overlap. This is the theoretical framework I adopted for my study. It is the Unified Theory of Acceptance and Use of Technology, which was developed by Venkatesh Morris, Davis and Davis in 2003. The authors who developed the UTAUT, as I call it, reviewed the existing user acceptance literature and 8 specific theoretical models. They then empirically compared the 8 models and developed a unified model that integrated key aspects of each and then tested it. Some of these other models include the Technology Acceptance Model, or TAM, the Theory of Planned Behavior, or TPB, the Diffusion of Innovations Theory, Social Cognitive Theory, and a few others. The UTAUT was originally formulated with 4 core determinants of intention and usage on the left side of the figure, and up to 4 moderators of key relationships on the bottom of the figure. Since the UTAUT was developed in the early 1990s, there have been 2 more recent updates that include more moderators like hedonic motivation, price value, and habit. For my study, I decided the original version with 4 constructs and 4 moderators was sufficient. In this figure, performance expectancy is the degree to which an individual believes that using a technology tool will improve their job performance in some way. Effort expectancy is the degree of ease associated with using an educational technology tool. Social influence is how an individual perceives the importance of other people using an educational technology tool. Facilitating conditions is defined by variances in individual belief that there's a support mechanism available to them for the use of a tool. Behavioral intention is the likelihood of someone to use a technology, and usage behavior refers to the actual usage of technology. While doing research on my study topic, I found hundreds of articles, chapters, and books, etc., that were relevant to certain aspects of it, and at the same time, very little on other aspects. Regarding technology adoption, there are hundreds of studies about technology anxiety and lack of self-confidence among users, including those by a couple specific studies I included in my literature review by Fiedler et al. In 2014 and Stansbury in 2017. Johnson et al. In 2012 found that age affects acceptance and use of technology. Quote, older and more experienced instructors tend to have higher levels of technology anxiety, end quote. Macedo in 2017 found that it can be also challenging for instructors to remain current and well-informed about how to choose and implement new technologies for the educational activities in which they will have a positive impact. Rachel Ellaway, who has written extensively about health sciences education, found that faculty feel threatened by technology while others feel it takes time away from their other responsibilities, as I mentioned earlier. And yet others feel that there is no support structure for proper utilization of the technology. I could go on and on here, but I think you get the picture. Now on to my research questions. The following 2 slides show my research questions, and I'll give you a moment to read them. And here are the other 2 questions. I already discussed briefly familiar uses of technology, so I won't go into more depth here. In many organizations, faculty have been advised to avoid the shiny thing effect. What is the shiny thing effect? It can be described as the use of technology without doing due diligence in determining if A, the technology is robust enough for use, B, cost, is it free? If it's free, why is it free? Are there loopholes? C, do you need permission to use a tool? D, who supports it if something goes wrong? Is it accessible to students or faculty with disabilities or other needs? In addition, I looked at the characteristics of learners across generations. There's usually overlap between these different generations, such as with Generation Z or the I generation with earlier millennials. While in this image there does not seem to be an overlap, there is no official agreement or consensus on date ranges or even names of these generations. Some previous research that used the UTAUT include the acceptance and use of mobile health technology by the elderly, Hoke and Sorwar in 2017. In this study, the researchers attempted to identify the factors behind the acceptance and use of mobile health technologies by the elderly in Bangladesh. As is typical of most studies that use the UTAUT, the internal reliability of their questionnaire was evaluated using Cronbach's alpha, and the level was 0.70, which is an acceptable level to indicate internal consistency. Based on their findings, the elderly preferred interactions with health professionals in person rather than using a mobile device. In another study of teacher perspectives on interactive whiteboards in elementary schools in an Eastern European country, the result was essentially the same with internal consistency, and the researchers found that teachers who had less than 10 years of teaching experience were less comfortable with technology than teachers who had more than 10 years experience. What I found is that there are surprisingly little use of UTAUT in studies regarding medical education. There was one study from the Tabriz University of Medical Sciences in Iran that used it to research factors that influence the adoption of e-learning among medical faculty. The results of this study showed that the UTAUT model explained approximately 56% of the variance for adoption of e-learning by faculty members. In most studies, this is usually a much higher percentage. Like my study, the constructs of performance expectancy, effort expectancy, social influence, and behavioral intention were found to have significant direct effects on faculty behavior toward e-learning. The construct of facilitating conditions did not have significant effects on their actual use of e-learning tools. Specifically for my study, performance expectancy represented the medical educator's belief that the use of educational technology in IBL activities will help achieve gains in content delivery. Effort expectancy represented the medical educator's belief regarding the ease of use of educational technology in IBL activities. Social influence represented the medical educator's perceptions of how others believe they should use educational technology in IBL activities. Facilitating conditions represented the medical educator's belief regarding the level of technical support that is available to them. Behavioral intention represented the medical educator's intention to use educational tech in IBL activities, and actual usage behavior represented the medical educator's actual use. My study was a quantitative, descriptive, non-experimental design and utilized a cross-sectional survey. More on the survey instrument will come a little later. The target population included various virtual communities of practice, such as Dr. Ed, the Team-Based Learning Collaborative, and specific listservs and groups from EDUCAUSE. There are many relevant groups through EDUCAUSE. The ones I used were for instructional technologists and designers and blended learning. Granted, these groups from EDUCAUSE were somewhat of a long shot, as it depended on whether subscribers work in medical education or they have colleagues who do. Fortunately, I've been a member of these groups for quite a while, so I felt less inhibited to pose such an ask. To filter out respondents, one of my initial questions in the survey asked if they had taught IBL activities in the previous 5 years. If they had not, they were not invited to continue on with the survey. The reason being is I wanted the delivery of IBL to be as recent as possible in people's minds so the responses would be more valid. The sample population size was determined by conducting an a priori analysis for correlational statistical tests using the G-POWER program. It was determined that I needed a minimum of 85 participants, and I ended up with 92 usable responses. IRB approval was obtained from Northern Illinois University prior to the deployment of the survey instrument. My survey was developed and modified based on the research study done by the original authors, as well as other related studies that have used this as their theoretical framework. I made necessary modifications to meet the needs of this study. In addition, the survey included a section to collect demographic information from participants, such as age, gender, education level, years of experience with educational technologies, and level of voluntariness of use of educational technologies. The survey instrument was open for about 3 weeks in October 2019. Looking back, I wish I had left it open for much longer. There is a whole other side story to that, and I won't get into that here. There were 55 items on my survey and consisted of the categories you see here, including the filtering question I mentioned already. As mentioned, the demographics section examines such variables as age, gender, highest degree earned, years teaching, academic rank, and clinical experience. The employment section examined teaching strategies used, resources available in information technology departments, topics taught, and the primary age of students taught. The 4 constructs used to measure the UTAUT were performance expectancy of 7 items, effort expectancy 8 items, social influence 7 items, and facilitating conditions 8 items. A 5-point Likert scale was used to measure each item in the UTAUT, ranging from 1 strongly disagree, 2 disagree, 3 undecided, 4 agree, to 5 strongly agree. 3 questions for effort expectancy were negatively worded, so during data analysis, these questions were reverse coded. The rating options were limited to 5 in order from the most negative feelings possible to the most positive possible. Including additional rating options might have confused survey respondents because people differ in their interpretation of options if there are too many of them, according to Fowler 2013. I developed the demographic and employment survey items myself. I completed all of the necessary tests of strength of relationships between the variables prior to deployment. Here are some sample instrument questions. Please take a moment to read them if you like. And the same with additional sample questions. Again, pause if you want to review them. Dr. Yoon-Soo Park was on the committee, so I worked with him on the data analysis, and it was thorough. The statistical approaches used were typical, as would be expected of a study like this. As you can see from these pie charts, the age of respondents was primarily in the 41 to 60 age range. For educational experience, primarily those with doctoral degrees responded. I did not include an option for joint MD-PhD, so that might have altered the results. For teaching experience, it was primarily those who have been at it for 16 to 35 years. Why is this important? I'm not sure, but it demonstrates that the more seasoned faculty responded to the survey. As you can see from this pie chart, the teaching strategies employed were primarily flipped classroom, didactic, TBL, and case studies. Respondents were able to select more than one option. On to some of the findings. For research question 1, the overall multiple regression model demonstrated that the 4 main constructs taken together as independent variables showed a statistically significant relationship to behavioral intention. The constructs of performance expectancy, effort expectancy, and social influence separately showed a statistically significant relationship to behavioral intention, while facilitating conditions does not. This result is not surprising, as other research studies have shown that facilitating conditions has a more significant relationship to actual usage behavior and not so much to behavioral intention. For research question 2, the overall multiple regression model here demonstrated that the 4 main constructs taken together as independent variables showed a statistically significant relationship to actual usage behavior. The constructs of performance expectancy, social influence, and facilitating conditions separately did not show a relationship to actual usage behavior, but effort expectancy did. This is a bit different than in past studies and reflects a potential flaw in the question being asked. Okay, and behavioral intention. The data reflects that medical educators are more likely to intend to use educational technology in their IBL activities if it would further their efforts and help them to be more confident in their content delivery. In my experience, I am sort of like the Pied Piper of technology and have been able to convince faculty that it would augment their delivery, but only after demonstrating issues surrounding how a technology performs. As far as effort involved, the more user-friendly a design is, the more likely it will be perceived as requiring the least amount of effort to use. This makes sense in my experience. There's enough happening in an IBL session for faculty to be concerned about, and if there's too much effort involved, they are less likely to intend to use something. More effort, less likelihood to intend to use a technology. Makes sense. In many studies, social influence has, well, a large influence on behavioral intention. Faculty seem to be influenced by their peers and administration to at least intend to use a technology. It could represent a form or perception of peer pressure by colleagues. Facilitating conditions is found to have a much more profound effect on actual usage behavior than on behavioral intention, but as pointed out already, this was not necessarily the case in my study. As it turns out, a more appropriate research question for research question 2 might have asked about the strength of the relationship between behavioral intention and facilitating conditions on actual usage behavior, since that is what most studies using the UTAUT have investigated. And this was also found to be the case when the UTAUT was first developed. Alas, that is not what I did. At any rate, it makes sense that the effort required for a technology to work correctly can rightly affect usage behavior. What does this mean? Perhaps it means that instructional designers and technologists should be included in the development of training for faculty to use technologies. I know from my own experience that the more efficient I can demonstrate that a technology is, there is an increased likelihood that faculty will use it. Questions 3 and 4 were a bit more complicated. Here's the question again for you to review. Some of the interaction effects. The interaction effects of age on the relationships between the 4 main constructs and behavioral intention individually were not statistically significant. The interaction effects of gender on the relationships between performance expectancy, facilitating conditions, and behavioral intention individually were statistically significant, while effort expectancy and social influence were not. The interaction effect of experience on the relationships between performance expectancy and behavioral intention individually was significant, while effort expectancy, facilitating conditions, and social influence were not statistically significant. The interaction effect of voluntary subuse on the relationship between performance expectancy and behavioral intention was statistically significant, while effort expectancy, facilitating conditions, and social influence were not. Here's research question 4. Take a moment to read it again. The interaction effect of age on the relationship between effort expectancy and actual usage behavior was statistically significant, as I mentioned, while performance expectancy, social influence, and facilitating conditions were not. The interaction effect of gender on the relationship between performance expectancy and actual usage behavior was statistically significant, while effort expectancy, social influence, and facilitating conditions were not. The interaction effect of experience on the relationships between performance expectancy, effort expectancy, facilitating conditions, and social influence and actual usage behavior were not statistically significant. And lastly, the interaction effect of voluntariness of use on the relationship between performance expectancy and actual usage behavior was statistically significant, while effort expectancy, facilitating conditions, and social influence were not. So what does it all mean? It's complicated. In my study data, gender was almost split evenly down the middle, even though alternative options for gender were included but not used by respondents. It seems to be that gender has a very slight impact on behavioral intention and performance expectancy, as an example. If faculty feel that their use of educational technology is voluntary, the more likely they will intend to use it. This makes sense as no one wants to feel pressure to do something or to use something. Similarly, if usage is voluntary, it is more likely faculty will actually use it. Some additional implications of the findings. Teamwork makes the dream work, as they say. Voluntariness of use of technology is integral on faculty expectations and intention. The more faculty feel their use of technology is voluntary as opposed to required impacts intention and actual use. Some additional questions that came out of this study: what interventions need to happen to better support faculty? Do faculty bow to peer pressure? If so, how can this be addressed? Future studies can expand on these results to delve deeper into linkages between age and behavioral intention, etc., for example, to determine how to better support their faculty. I had planned on doing a follow-up survey during COVID times. As I mentioned, my initial survey was done prior to the COVID pandemic. That is to be determined at this point. And here are some references that I will go through fairly quickly. You can pause and take a look at them as you like. These are just selected references, obviously not my entire list. And thank you for your attention. You can contact me at max@uic.edu.